Welcome to the Bitcoin Business Podcast put on by Sovereign. I am your host, Brandon Karpeles. Today I have with me a very special guest, Wyatt O'Rourke, who, if you've been around the Bitcoin space for a little bit, you've probably heard of him. You probably know who he is. He wrote a book called The Bitcoinization of Finance. He runs his own firm. He's the founder of Basilic, which is a financial services business investment um, platform, certified financial planning type structure for clients. And we're going to talk a lot. I'm excited to have this conversation. We really haven't talked about individuals in this space, sort of the financial planning space. We've talked to a lot of business owners. We've talked to venture capitalists. We've talked to investors, that sort of thing. But we haven't talked to someone who is day to day trying to help clients understand Bitcoin, possibly get it in their portfolio, what that looks like, etc. Also, Wyatt is going to be an integral part of the Financial Services Conference out in Denver from October 16th to October 18th at the Space in Denver. I think a little redundancy there, apologies. But so want to talk about that, what to expect from that. I will be speaking at that conference, and I'm super excited for that conference. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I want to start with Wyatt, your background, how you got into Bitcoin, why you decided to write a book, and then ultimately the business you founded and what your sort of principles are and how you got there. So let's start there, and then we'll branch off from there.
Excellent. No, Brandon, thanks so much for having me, man. It's an absolute pleasure. Very excited, to be on here representing, folks who get their hands dirty and work with the plebs as opposed to, sitting in ivory tower all day. So that'll be awesome. But yeah, man, I don't think my Bitcoin journey is actually too unique. I went to college and got a Keynesian finance degree, which I now regret. But hindsight's twenty
You
twenty.
can just say finance degree from college.
Right, right.
The,
Yeah.
the, the Keynesian's implicit. Yes.
That's right. That's right. And,
Yeah.
I think it was first exposed to Bitcoin in 2017. I knew a guy who was literally selling drugs for Bitcoin. So it just fit like every FUD narrative I've heard to that point. It doesn't cash flow. I was trying to study Buffett and like we were building discounted cash flow models in class, and it was just like totally uninterested in Bitcoin. But uh, it was until 2020 during the pandemic that my roommate and I were locked in our apartment. He was a Bitcoiner, and he just kept hammering me about it. And it was like, just literally just to get him to shut up. It's like, okay, I'll listen to your podcast. And like, fortunately, he recommended, Press and Pitch to me. And, um, I think, right place, kind of right time, just, Preston's background. I think he was literally just starting his podcast right around there. I think got into like the fourth episode or something. He obviously kind of comes from, a finance, value investing background. And so it just really kind of connected, with me, kind of hearing and understanding like the kind of the economic and finance side behind Bitcoin. And I worked in various fields of finance, real estate, asset management, some IB and MPE, but really just kind of identify more as a entrepreneur. So I had a startup that went under, and so I was thinking about what's next. And at this point, I'm very involved in the Denver Bitcoin community, and I view my peers as other maximalists. And so I knew I want to start a Bitcoin company, but I can't code or anything. All my career skills and industry background are in finance. So I was like, shoot, how do I start a Bitcoin company? And just talking with friends and mentors, decided to adopt the RIA business model, and just integrate Bitcoin from the start. So state registered fiduciary and RIA firm in Colorado, and just went fully independent, which is kind of like the entrepreneurial nature of my background. And in doing so, we wanted to create an RIA firm that can particularly service Bitcoiners. We still do some TradFi stuff. That still tends to be a part of people's portfolios, or we work with small business owners and like 401k plans and use that as opportunity to introduce them to Bitcoin or whatever it may be. But it's very exciting. One of 11 or 12 in the Bitcoin Financial Advisors Network. So there's a handful of us that are really kind of pioneering, working with individuals kind of on like the personal finance level to embrace Bitcoin and help them better understand Bitcoin. And from the onset, I think I've drawn and learned so much from the Bitcoin community. We're very intentional about what I call the Bitcoin ethos, is doing Bitcoin or doing business within the Bitcoin ethos. And so if our clients own Bitcoin, there's a very high chance, like 99% plus chance, that it's cold storage, bare asset Bitcoin. And it's like we don't compromise on our values. We only do business with Bitcoin only partners. And so just try to stay really true to the maximalist mission. And unfortunately, I have my peers to thank for that. They hold me to a high standard. I think it's kind of funny. I'm sure we'll get into this more, but there's kind of a disdain in the Bitcoin community at large, I think, financial services and professional services in general. And so I really wanted to make sure our firm kind of passes the Bitcoin smell test, and we try to be as transparent as possible with that. Like I said, within the ethos of Bitcoin. So that's really kind of how Basilic started and how I got into Bitcoin.
Yeah, why do you think that is? Especially if you're advising cold storage, I know like Morgan Richard, Pierre Richard's wife, she provides sort of financial planning for people into the future. I actually had a friend who we were just talking before we went on about a very unfortunate situation that happened. We won't get into it, but I was talking with that friend, and he's been in Bitcoin for a very long time, and has a sizable Bitcoin position, and he was like, I have no idea what I want to do with all of this, or just he owns other assets too, and it's like I don't know, and a lot of times people don't even know the right questions to ask themselves, like what is it I value? Why do I value these things? And I'm curious as to your opinion as to why there's such a pushback. I wouldn't say such a pushback, but I agree with you. There's some shade thrown on the industry, but to like helping people navigate through this stuff. I had a Dick Greaser on here, and we were talking a long time about sort of the how much better you can make your life by leaning on experts, the sort of division of labor, outsourcing some things that at the end of the day, you're not really compromising on your sovereignty or your values or anything like that. You're just going to a professional to say, hey, I need some help in this regard. This is a lot. It's overwhelming. I'm doing a lot of times. I mean, people like myself, I'm running a business. I'm ahead of an HOA. I have a family. Like, there's until recently, I was on the board of a nonprofit. Like, there's a lot of things going on in my life that just take up a lot of my time. And it's like, there's certain things I would rather just be like, okay, I'm going to go to a professional. I'm going to get some help on this. So, why do you think there is such aversion to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll get into that second. So you're the HOA president.
I not by choice, man. I hate it more than anything. Everyone else is such a lazy sack of crap in my building that I'm forced to do it. Otherwise, I'd be living in like it would look like a scene out of Gaza if I didn't take care of this place. So it's just it's brutal. I hate it. I
Oh,
can't wait
that's
to move.
funny. That's funny. No, I
Yeah,
could resist getting a little jab in there, the dreaded HOA president. But uh,
so, so miserable.
um, yeah, I think it's a little multifaceted. I think part of this is, have you seen that graph floating around on Twitter lately of like the Myers-Briggs personality types and Bitcoiners?
Yes, yes.
I'm not super into that like personality type stuff, but I do think it's interesting. I think if I'm recalling correctly, it's like INTJ and ENTJ are like the the vast majority of Bitcoiners. So I do think, yeah, and this kind of stems from.
I'm an ENTJ, so yeah.
Okay, I am as well. So
Yeah.
props there. I think, yeah, a lot of this kind of stems from Bitcoin's kind of like cypherpunk, libertarian, roots, and obviously, a certain type of person that is attracted to Bitcoin. I think that has, something to do with it. But I think, kind of a bigger reason, and I think this will only, kind of last for a finite period of time, predominantly, among like the first movers and early adopters. And, those people tend to be, think about things a little differently too. But I'm kind of paraphrasing Safedine, but if you I think of like any industry is susceptible to fiatness. Finance specifically, I kind of broadly think of it's kind of like the business of money. So it was like particularly susceptible to fiatness and fiat games, and so the industry's had a bad rap for a long time. Don't get me wrong, but then Safedine says that again paraphrasing here, it's like we don't need financial advisor because Bitcoin's a savings technology. You can just buy and hold Bitcoin, it will appreciate. And that has a lot to do, almost all to do with just kind of the native aspects of Bitcoin. So he's not necessarily wrong there, or I think he's kind of falls short, or is a little short-sighted at least, is that like you're saying, it's like there is this division, of labor. People have specialization. I think that's just, part of the economy, and that's not, a bad thing. And so I think, what we really kind of try to focus on, myself at Basilic and, the Bitcoin Financial Advisor Network, at large is, kind of, countering some of these natives. And I think, Bitcoiners want to work with Bitcoiners. So if we prove that, we pass the Bitcoin smell test, people are more, likely to trust us and work with us. And we help people with sound money strategies. And, our slogan is prosperity with purpose. So a lot of my clients, come to me, or, new clients specifically, it's like, okay, I've stacked sats. Like, now what? It's like there's so much more to our lives than just accumulating Bitcoin. Obviously, that's very important. I really, try to lead with my faith and my daily life and, in my work. And one of my biggest gripes with Bitcoiners is making Bitcoin an idol. And, it's like I really I'm appalled when people do that, because it's just money. It's just a tool. It's the best form of money we've ever known, which is awesome. Which is why we Bitcoin. That being said, specifically, I tend to work with clients here predominantly in like financial planning, and kind of set my firm up a little differently, where it's kind of more a la carte. So just because I do a financial plan for you doesn't mean I manage your assets. And so I, like financial planning, the most, and that's my biggest business segment. But when we're doing that, specifically with the Bitcoiners, like we have to, really zoom out. And it's like we take a human first approach, and we identify like what's truly important to them, and we, can strategize on how Bitcoin can help them, achieve their goals. And this really plays into more what we'll talk about. It's like the growing, subsector of Bitcoin financial services. But um, I really try to lead with a strong and grounded moral worldview, where it's like we're the first generation of Bitcoiners, whether we like it or not, and that comes with a lot of responsibility for us to be a good steward of our asset. Um, and when we're working through like the forecasting segment of financial plan, forecasting itself a little more than a art than a science. So there's a lot of caveats that come with it, but generally, the assets at the end of the plan tend to be larger than what people may have expected and anticipated. So while we're working through the life of the plan, we're tapping into different Bitcoin collateralized lending mechanisms. There's a lot of interesting like HELOC products. So we're identifying what how we can make our Bitcoin work as hard for us as possible to better our lives and the people around us. But a lot of the conversation really ends up focusing, it's like, okay, well, like what's next, right? And so with that responsibility, it's like, how are we showing the next generation of Bitcoiners uh, the proper way to not only steward the asset while you're alive, but pass on that asset inheritance. And there's some nuances to Bitcoin inheritance, because it's not just like your run of the mill custody asset. And I really don't think there's anything wrong with seeking a professional to help you with that. It's like I'm sure you've had experiences where it could be nice just to have a neutral third party that's a sounding board in the room, and really has your best interests in mind. So long and short of it is like I think early adopters, early Bitcoiners, a little predisposition from their kind of personality to be skeptical of financial services or professional services. And I think there's been a little FUD prolificated in the space about why you don't need those, but in all practicality, just because we have Bitcoin doesn't mean a lot of tried and true financial planning kind of like rules of thumb or practices in general don't apply to Bitcoiners and Bitcoin holders.
I also think there's sort of for those of us that are early adopters, and I honestly until we're on parity with gold, I consider early
Oh, I
adopters.
like that.
So like yeah, and so we've spent a lot of time sort of understanding finance, understanding money, getting all these things, doing a lot of this on our own. Yes, there's tons of resources out there, but we've kind of sought out the resources. But it's sovereign. We're going in, we're helping businesses get up to speed to buy Bitcoin. And like, part of our value proposition is it's all, the best day to buy a Bitcoin was yesterday, the second best is today, and so it's like people are paying for a service to be like, I haven't fully gone down the rabbit hole. I don't fully understand everything, but I get the general concept of a finite supply of money and an infinite supply of dollars, and I just need some help here. And there's going to be a massive wave of, and already is starting to come in, of people in that camp, and to just sort of leave them to the wolves of like, okay, we've set you up, you've heard about this Bitcoin thing, you understand finite scarcity, um, we set you up with an account, you moved it to your wallet, great, now you're on your own. Like that, I mean, those people especially are going to have a need for someone to help them out, someone to guide them through. And yeah, they could go down the rabbit hole themselves. They could put in the thousands of hours that we've all put in, but just a lot of people just aren't going to do that. And I mean, that's just the reality. And so we can be angry about it, or we could provide services and goods to these people that will make sure they don't end up, buying FTT token and getting completely destroyed, holding their money on some, less than reputable exchange. So, like, there's that angle of it too. And then, as I was saying before, I mean, that there are plenty of people with plenty of Bitcoin who just want some help, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, and I think it's very important. And I just kind of think it's like okay, we understand that like that those they simply are how economies work. But I think it's really up to folks like you and I that are building businesses in the space to hold each other accountable to kind of like the Bitcoin ethos I was you mentioned earlier. And I think the Bitcoin ethos manifests itself in like different ways depending on what industry you work in. My industry, specifically, if I'm looking at recommending an exchange or a custody partner, it's like is it cold storage? Is it 2 or 3 multi-sig? Are there proof of reserves? And so it's incumbent on I think the early builders and entrepreneurs in the Bitcoin space, regardless of what type of business you're building, to embrace like whatever principles are pertinent to your business. And it's like if we all do that, and we only do business with people that share those same values and principles, we're going to help onboard a lot more people to Bitcoin than what would have been onboarded um, previously. And I think we're going to onboard people what I deem like the right way, which is as most true to the Bitcoin principles as we possibly can be. And something I think about a lot like the cultural aspect of Bitcoin. I am really into like the philosophical aspect of Bitcoin. I think that, these not like an expert by any means, but these are fun threads to pull on. Kind of reference what I said about the first generation of Bitcoiners. Like you and I are much closer to the cypherpunks than our children. So it's like, how do we make sure our children like share their same ideals? Well, it's because we pass it down to them and we respected those ideals, and we respect the work and sacrifice it took to get to the point where we're at. And I think we're doing a great disservice to the Bitcoiners that came before us if we don't try to embrace those ideals in the businesses we're starting.
Yeah, we have such an ethical responsibility to do this the right way and to make sure people come into the space and avoid the pitfalls. It requires a lot of integrity. And um, I like to say you can always earn more Bitcoin, but you can never earn back your reputation. And like
That
that is so important. And when you have people aligned with that mentality like you were talking about to bring in this new wave of people, these that I'm sure we've all orange pilled people in our lives. I mean, I have someone I just finally, after 2 years, one of my wife's best friend, finally, I had her set up with a Moon wallet. I had her set up with a Strike account. I'm like, just buy some on here, send to here. We'll do the cold storage part next. And it was just like, and it was just like, never gonna do it, never gonna do it, never gonna do it. Finally, like after 2 years, got her to do it. She's set up now on River. She's buying a hardware wallet, and like we're gonna do this properly. Um, but she's not going to go do 1,000 hours of research. She's not going to look into this. And guess what? If I had told her to sign up on Coinbase and sprinkle a little XRP in there, sprinkle a little ETH in there, like she would have done it because she was trusting my opinion, trusting what I know, that I've done the research, I've done the legwork. But because I was like, use this Bitcoin only exchange, get a Bitcoin only hardware wallet, and we're only buying Bitcoin. Now she has steered herself in the right direction, and she's putting whatever it is per week away, and in 20 years from now, she's going to be in an incredible position. And that was just one person we were touching that we put on the right path that would have never gotten on the path by themselves. So they failed the Bitcoin purity test for sure. They didn't do their own research, but they're going to be in a better position than everyone else that starts a year from now, 2 years from now, or all the no coiners out there. So, and I find value in that, and I find a good sense of purpose and appreciation and satisfaction from that. And I think anyone sort of poo-pooing people that go about things that way just completely have um, their compass is pointing the wrong direction.
No, I would largely agree. I think you're 100% right. So it's like, well, if we can help fast track people, it's like a reason I know as much as I do is because Bitcoin, for better or worse, really kind of came like my personality for a while. It was like I was obsessed with it, and it's like it aligned with like, a lot of the prior interests I had, so it was kind of like a natural onboarding to uh, go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. But a lot of people don't share my same interests, and they're not gonna kind of be predispositioned to do that. But that doesn't mean like they won't benefit from sound money, right? And so that's where it's like really emphasize and hammer home the point here. It's like you doing that as a trusted Bitcoiner that embraces like the Bitcoin ethos. Like I just don't understand like the pushback with that doesn't help people.
And, and like you said earlier, Bitcoin is just a tool. It's just money. And there's just a lot of people who just don't care about this stuff. They're just like, I just want to be able to like buy groceries and be with my family and I just don't care about any of this stuff. Like it doesn't matter to me. It's not exciting to me. And I am glad you showed me a better way to save my money. And that's kind of where this ends. And there's just going to be a ton of people like that as we move forward. And it's like anything else. I mean, it's pick a topic. There's many things that I just don't care about that I would much rather like, it's always like we just had some plumbing replaced in our building. Yeah, as HOA
Yeah, I was
president,
gonna
I had
say,
to make
Mr.
sure
HOA
that we
president here.
yeah, make sure we didn't have a massive problem on our hands. But the plumbing guys came in and they were like, okay, we put this thermal pack in and we did this and so it's that. And I'm just like, I appreciate you telling me this. I know you are excited about your job and what you did, but I'm just like, I don't care, man. Like you're here, I'm gonna pay you a couple $100 and you're gonna take care of this, and that's good by me. And like if I never figure out how plumbing works in my life, I kind of don't care. And so I just I try to respect other people as they, see money the same way. They're just, it doesn't intrigue them. They don't care. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, appreciate the advice. You're the expert. I got it. I trust you. So, anyways, I want to talk about the book you wrote a little bit. Why did you decide to write that? So, a lot of people, oh, I wanted to get my thoughts down, or I needed to explain this to myself. How did you? I mean, for someone that sort of came at it from the value investing angle in 2020, what inspired you to put a book together?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I really started to get fed up with how often and frequently Bitcoiners would just put down finance, and it's like they just completely write it off. And yeah, don't get me wrong. It's like the finance industry is like full of unethical actors. But I think we need to distinguish, and this is what I really get into the book, where it's like, well, yes, I mean, finance has been co-opted or corrupted by fiat money, however you want to look at it. But that doesn't mean the system itself or the tools it's provided over hundreds or thousands of years now aren't pertinent or useful in a on a Bitcoin standard. And so my attempt at this was like, it's not, I would say, your entry level Bitcoin book. It's mainly tailored towards finance professionals or people interested in the finance industry at large. But what I do think any run of the mill Bitcoiner could take away from it is just understanding that finance itself isn't like inherently evil, right? These are just tools, products, and strategies that can be applied to Bitcoin, which I think is very exciting. I don't think I do think we'll get to like a hyper Bitcoinized world, but I don't think we'll get there without finance and the finance industry. It's like if the largest pools of capital in the world are going to move dollars into Bitcoin, you need to leverage like the finance system. And so I kind of think of like the financialization of Bitcoin as applying stratified tools, products, and strategies to Bitcoin. Yeah, I think like a good example of this is like Bit bonds, right? Nothing new about a bond. We're just now applying it to Bitcoin, which is very exciting. And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. It's like I think our responsibility as financial professionals is getting to the Bitcoinization of finance, which is a financial system where custody, settlement, and value are unified in one protocol. And it's really kind of removing the paper layer, which is prolific in finance. And I think Bitcoin's super feature is the ability for any one person to take custody of the bear asset, and that it trades and settles in kind. And I kind of use an example in the book of gold. People have been complaining for decades that the gold market is manipulated, and that really kind of has to do with the paper layer. And so my friend Eric Yates wrote The Seventh Property. He has a great chart in there about the maturation of currencies, and so it's store value, medium exchange, unit of account, and I think over time as fiat money, paper money has become more prolific, gold has actually demoted down that cycle. So it was the unit of account, then it got shoeboxed and medium exchange. Now it's just shoeboxed into store of value. And part of this is practical. Some of it, I think you could make the case for nefarious, but the practicality of gold, it's heavy, it's physical in the real world. Like you need a lot of security to move it, and so it's just much easier logistically to have like this paper layer on top of it. But then if you have a infinite paper layer on top of a finite asset, you end up with all these, distortions in the market. And I think that's largely because the gold itself isn't physically settling at the end of each trade. And what makes Bitcoin unique as an internet native protocol where the asset and the network are intrinsically intertwined is, you could have like a futures or an options, product, which again, there's nothing inherently wrong with, a futures or options contract. That is just a strictly a business contract where two parties decide to enter either side of a trade. I think Bitcoin perfectly fits into that. The important thing and what I'm really trying to emphasize, in my industry and finance industry, is that we you know pioneer really usher in a Bitcoin denominated financial system where we won't settle for Bitcoin not settling in that trade, right? And that's where I think we actually true up markets and things become much more real. And
That's the huge difference. I
exactly,
mean, that
yeah,
is, man, I've gosh, that's so important is that when these trades are completed that you actually settle, because in our current system nothing settles, and that's why they
exactly,
just
yeah.
go on into perpetuity. That's why you end up with naked shorts. And I would be willing to bet dollars to donuts, although that might not be a good reference anymore. I think inflation has screwed up the math on that. But anyways, um, uh, that there's over shorted positions of available float for Bitcoin. Like I have no doubt in my mind that that's the case. And to your point, until people actually take settlement, they force. There is a forcing function where you can say, "Hey, I'm calling bullshit." And I want to settle, and you can unwind those positions, unlike a GameStop where, or I think a Volkswagen was a similar situation where there was just way more shorts than there were underlying shares. You can't make any more Bitcoin, and like that is the ultimate. Um, that is the ultimate truth holder, keeping people honest property of Bitcoin, where you can make sure that people aren't allowed to get away with those trades and don't have final settlements with those trades and just roll the paper on the paper on the paper. So sorry I cut you off there a little
No,
bit.
I'm happy you did because you're 100% right, and it's a beautiful job emphasizing the point. Because Bitcoin settles 10 minutes around the world. It's like there's no excuse not to, and part of this will be the responsibility of you know the the market participants that decide to utilize some of these products and strategies out there to make sure the service provider is actually settling in kind. And this is already starting to happen, in which I'm super excited about because I think we're still pretty early into the Bitcoinization of finance. And so example of that, certainly no fan of BlackRock, but I do have to give them credit. They filed for in kind ETF redemption, and so just the threat of being able to withdraw or take custody of Bitcoin from an ETF product holds all the ETF issuers, responsible to prevent rehypothecation. They have to have all the Bitcoin they say they have. There's some nuances there too, ETF redemption, but I think another derivative of this where we do see the Bitcoinization of finance and the Bitcoin ethos playing out is, in Chicago, where you're at, like Bitnomial is, a CFTC regulated futures exchange, and they do a lot of work with hash rate trading. Um, and they partnered with Luxor and so on the futures product you don't take custody of the physical hash rate, but on the forward product, you can actually receive delivery of the hash rate. So it's like, is the underlying asset, trading at the base level, and that's crucially important. And we're starting to see like some good work and progress on that front, which makes me very excited.
Gosh, yeah, that is, yeah, man, that I interjected because it's just such an important point. And Lynn Alden talked about this in her book Broken Money. That what you were talking about earlier is how gold sort of got demoted down the chain from unit of account to medium of exchange to store of value. It was the first time in history where we had fiat money where people chose an inferior over a superior money because of some of the properties that were offered with the inferior money were deemed to be more important, more valuable than a store of value, and the medium of exchange portion of it. They were able to move money faster. They were able to, as we entered sort of global trade, that they were able to send funds more quickly across the world, and that had more value even though your underlying asset was not as valuable as some other form of money. So it's crazy, and it is super exciting that Bitcoin basically solves all those problems. That we have the fast settlement, we have the lightning quick, no pun intended, medium of exchange, and all these things will get sorted out. And Bitcoin is not going to go the way of gold because it has superior store of value and superior than gold, and then superior transactional capabilities than fiat. So um,
Exactly.
super excited.
Well, if you
Yeah.
just double click on that, and so it's like how the Bitcoinization of finance, thesis plays out is really deepening Bitcoin capital markets. And so if you have more tools, products, and strategies available to Bitcoiners and Bitcoin holders available in the market, you just intrinsically allow for more market participants to take, one side of the trade or the other. And so, regardless of the, financial product, and I should have said this earlier, but educational purposes only, not financial advice. Thoughts and opinions are our own, but whether it be a bond or some sort of futures, just the creation of those products is going to allow for more market participants to be active in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Whether we like it or not, a lot of big pools of capital, whether it be some sort of CalPERS type fund, state pension fund, or some sort of like insurance fund where they're sitting on a lot of dollars, or a lot of dollars accessible to them. They have self-imposed investment mandates where they might not be able to invest into Bitcoin, spot Bitcoin directly. So do they have some sort of like derivative product that they can invest in and get exposure to Bitcoin? And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's kind of a natural evolution of the currency maturation cycle, because it's allowing them to at least get like their foot in the door, dip their toe in the water, and ultimately, it's like when we do move to a Bitcoin standard, and that's like the unit of account, these institutions will be ready for that. And so, I think this is mainly playing out with like Bitcoin treasury companies right now. I think that's kind of like the biggest push into like the Bitcoinization of finance, or like at least like the most popular. And it's just like I'm kind of deeming this market as like dollar on dollar return with Bitcoin exposure. And so it's like it's dollars in, dollars out, but ultimately the underlying asset you're investing in is Bitcoin, or you want Bitcoin exposure by investing in these vehicles.
Yeah, to that point, the thing that's bad is the current system, and what's precluded from these investment vehicles for these pension funds, and the fact that they are unable to buy something like Bitcoin to hold the underlying. I mean, that uh, the whole concept of like there's certain things you are allowed to own, aren't allowed to own, um, and then the conclusion is okay, well, um, these have to be conservative things, and then to misunderstand Bitcoin is risky. I mean, just the whole it's just a perfect example of the absurdity of central planning, why it never works, and why all these systems eventually collapse because you can't centrally plan markets, and there is no oracle, there is no know it all, there is no box you can stuff everything in to make it work. And unfortunately, there are, in my opinion, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to experience a lot of pain, um, because were they were unable to get access to a better form of money. And these pension funds, these 401ks, I mean, they're lobster traps. I mean, it's my money. Like, why am I? And I know why. You're forced to keep it in the market and all this other stuff because Clinton, I think, changed the rules back in '94 to get people to start investing in these things so we can prop up the stock market and get more tax revenues, and it's a giant sham. But anyways, I digress. That um it's it's just very unfortunate that so many people are going to be left by the wayside. And to your point, if there is some way for, the system's messed up, the fact that we have to create these products to tap into these capital pools and get people over there is sad. It's unfortunate. um, but at least it's something. And obviously, so, transitioning from this concept to what you're doing at your business, yeah, and you don't want people to have these derivative exposures, and you would much rather have them holding their own self-custody Bitcoin than having to get some sort of paper exposure from some fund manager who you'll never meet in your life, making decisions on how your family's going to survive for 20 years into retirement. What is your ethos of the company? What are you advising folks? And I know you said you deal mostly with Bitcoiners, so I'm guessing they probably understand it, but you said you deal with some other folks as well that come to you with 401k plans, potentially some other investment vehicles. So what's sort of your advice and guidance to those folks?
Yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate the question. Everybody's, you know, financial pictures is unique, and so it's our duty and it's our responsibility to meet them, where they're at. And I've kind of crafted this like menu, this Bitcoin menu, I call it. So it's like it's pretty or fairly easy, bridge across to Bitcoin if somebody's a gold bug and they know the money's broken. They just haven't, identified, Bitcoin. Some people are more interested in like the sovereign aspect. And, we saw that I always point to like the Canadian trucker, instance of just like this. I'm happy you brought up central planning so we can crap on that, but I'll do that every chance I get. But it's just like this insane overreach of a tyrannical state, and so I think it really threatens us. I'm a a proud Catholic, and one thing I've been bringing up to my Catholic clients is that just recently, like the FBI was literally investigating, traditional Latin mass, parishes and like infiltrating them and monitoring them and watching them, for whatever. I think it's really BS reasons, but it's just like I bring that up because it's like we never know how close we are to being censored, to being debanked. It's like these were people that were literally going to mass and they're being watched and monitored by the FBI. And you know one thing.
But the lockdowns,
Yeah.
lockdown, you can't go to church, well, are you, I'm a Christian myself, and Protestant, sorry. Well, you're still my brother in Christ, but no, I'm kidding. But I was really disappointed during the lockdowns about how weak of a stance the church took, and sort of they kind of bent the knee to the state as opposed to God. And your calling is to serve God and your community, your church, your parishioners, and not to serve the state. And the reality is, It's unfortunate, but it's true. Most of them didn't stand up to the state because they didn't want to lose their nonprofit status. And they didn't want to have the financial rug pulled out from underneath them. And um, I could talk forever about the moral and ethical decisions that were made during that time. I think 95% of American churches failed the test that was put to them. But that's a different story. But I can guarantee if they had Bitcoin and they were self sovereign in that and had custody over their money, that they may have felt very, very differently about the decisions they were making and sort of the trade offs that I know they rationalized to themselves that, well, if we don't do this, we're not going to be able to stay open. And then no one will be able to come when we're let back out of our houses. And there's a lot of people that need us. And I know the mental gymnastics they went through, but um, I think having your own money, having custody to your own funds in a situation like that, with a church, you're going to feel a lot better about staying strong to your morals and your convictions when you know the financial rug's not going to be pulled out from underneath you.
No, 100%. And unfortunately, I think that's a black eye we have to live with. But going forward, like we need to be smarter and understand what we're up against. And it's like fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And it's like, okay, like we got fooled once. Now the onus is really on us to be responsible. And I think kind of the epitome of central planning is the worship of man and worship of the state. And clearly. Um, that is opposed to the Christian, moral worldview. So it's like, are we prepared to, um, if that position is presented to us again, learn from our mistakes and be able to move forward in a better way? And I think Bitcoin is one of the best tools to do that. And so, these are things, I try to identify with people who are on like the front end of Bitcoin. And, anytime I do a financial plan, whether they're Bitcoin or not, it's like, I believe it's my fiduciary duty to talk about Bitcoin, not only the best performing, asset over the last 10 years, but there's all these, other, principles that we don't want to, leave out and how that, integrates into, somebody's personal finances. And so, regardless of whether somebody's a new Bitcoiner or they've been in Bitcoin for a while, it's like something we don't compromise on at Basilic is self custody. And so, I've partnered with Unchained, and again, this is in the vein of meeting people where they're at, and they're a great partner. I'm stoked to be working with them, and we, with their help, can offer 3 tiers of custody solutions. So, if you're a Bitcoiner, been in it for a while, we have what we call like the client model, where you hold 2 keys and Unchained has one. We can help you, set up a vault. We can help you walk you through UTXO management, on-chain hygiene, security, best security, and like privacy practices. We also offer an advisor model, where like myself as a key agent, we can hold one of the keys in the quorum. So then you hold a key, and then chain has a key. And then if somebody's not comfortable holding physical keys, we have multi-institutional multi-sig available to us, and we can enroll to U.S. domiciled trust companies to hold the key on our behalf. And we start actually kind of like at the end. So it's like, okay, it's like we have Bitcoin, we're thinking about buying Bitcoin. It's like, well, we need to make sure it's custody correctly. It's that's literally where we start, which may sound a little counterintuitive to people. I hear a lot. It's like, well, we get to like $10,000 or whatever, and then you can explore like cold storage. Where it's like that's not something we're really willing to compromise on. And I think holding Bitcoin and understanding, I take this from Spider-Man, but so good. It's like with great power becomes great responsibility, and it's like that's where we start. And so we really kind of try to frame it in terms of risk surface area. There's no silver bullet to cold storage. So we identify which with each individual client, because everybody's circumstances are different. It's like how we reduce our risk surface area the most, and ultimately a custody solution that works well for them and has mitigated as much risk as possible. And then from there, it's really kind of more about position sizing. I tend to be a just DCA advocate. We buy when it's high, we buy when it's low. Over longer period of time, we end up looking pretty good. And so I don't really think we need to overthink it in terms of acquiring Bitcoin, we try to be very intentional where we acquire Bitcoin. Like you mentioned Strike, it's generally for me River Strike or Unchained, depending on their account type. And then your position sizing is also going to differ a lot from people. I still have some clients that are proud American patriots and they want exposure to traditional capital markets and certain companies they believe in. I don't necessarily have a gripe with that as long as we're just not like purchasing the market broadly, which unfortunately a lot of people do, just given the proliferation of passive index investing. Not really a fan of that. But ultimately, depending how comfortable people are with the asset and technology, that's where we really kind of like fine tweak their position sizing. I love this, man. I love working with Bitcoiners. I have some clients who which I don't necessarily disagree with them. It just really flies in the face of traditional finances. Like they believe they're diversified because they have 70% Bitcoin and 30% MicroStrategy. And it's like they understand the risk of those investments. They're comfortable with the allocation. It's like, okay, that's great. It's my fiduciary duty to make sure you understand what you're in, and then ultimately give my two sats on how to move forward with that allocation. And sometimes we may agree or disagree, but ultimately we're working as a team. And ultimately so okay, we have position sizing figured out, then it really comes back to your goals and what you want to do. If goal is to acquire more Bitcoins, like we look at their existing asset and liability standing. It's like a lot of Bitcoiners I've just seen anecdotally are fairly uh, light on debt. They just don't tend to believe in it. And so it's like, okay, well, can we use a Bitcoin collateralized loan to acquire more Bitcoin? It's like, do you have a lot of home equity? There's some exciting new HELOC products with like Orange Bridge and Horizon where we can tap into that idle equity to acquire more Bitcoin. There's meanwhile, I give them a ton of prompts, like they're pioneering a Bitcoin denominated life insurance policy. And as an advisor, it gives me a lot of optionality, and I give all the entrepreneurs in the space a ton of credit because it makes my job easier. It's like, okay, now we have quality companies doing things the right way, the Bitcoin way, that we can then go out and utilize a lot of these TradFi strategies in a Bitcoin way. It's like there's nothing new about a whole life insurance policy. There's nothing new about a HELOC. It's just like now we can utilize it in a Bitcoin sense. And so I think that's extremely exciting. We help clients with whatever it may be they're trying to achieve in Bitcoin, and then just kind of end here too. It's like, okay, it's like if our goal is to acquire more Bitcoin, or a lot of times too, just to like emphasize. I don't mind, spending Bitcoin. I don't think that's like a bad thing. And like I was saying earlier, I don't think we should make it an idol. It's like if you want to buy, your dream forever home that you want to pass on to your children, their children's children. It's like that's not necessarily a bad thing to spend Bitcoin on if we identify this is important to us, right? And so we help clients. It's just kind of like Bitcoiners kind of get themselves in a mental pretzel a lot, or it's like, oh, I've worked so hard or sacrificed a lot to acquire Bitcoin, which is great. It's very honorable. Love that Bitcoiners embrace like low time preference just because it's so hard to find and a run of mill society, but it doesn't mean it's everything. And so kind of just like helping them get over the hump of like, okay, I am actually going to spend some Bitcoin to do this thing that's important to me. And then ultimately it's like leaving a lasting impact. I think it takes a certain type of individual to be kind of tuned into this, and this is where I try to help a lot. It's like, is there a church, is there a charity that's close to your heart, that you can leave potentially a substantial amount of Bitcoin soon? You can only imagine the impact that can have to that type of organization. I think HRF is a great example of this. It's like how they're able to use Bitcoin to affect positive change in the world. It's like not something we can be that can be understated, and that's why we also focus on custody to begin with. Because if the Bitcoin never gets there, it's like, well, then we failed to being good stewards of the asset, along the way.
Oh, gosh, that's so true. It sounds like we have a very similar approach. We start at Our recommendation is the most self-sovereign possible, and we will never recommend you leave your coins on an exchange. We will stop, like you said, at multi-institution custody. Love Unchained, what the guys have done over there, and yeah, it's so critical to have that because, like you said, if there is nothing wrong with spending money. Money is meant to be exchanged for goods and services later. That is literally the entire point of money. So if you're not spending it, I mean, you're just you're kind of just a hoarder. I don't know what you're doing, unless your sole intent is I'm going to not sell any because it's going to drive the price up, and then I'll give it to my kid and they'll benefit. But that's it's a far reach. Like, what good is the price appreciation of Bitcoin if you're just not gonna not gonna afford yourself anything in life? I mean, part of having money is to make your life easier, to uh, to do stuff with your family, to spend your time how you want to do it. And ultimately, you spend your time because you have money to spend for bills or trips or whatever else you need. And yeah, I like the mental pretzel analogy because it is a conundrum. I mean, to your point, it's like, okay, should I buy this or should I not? It's like, in 5 years, this vacation will cost 10 times as much probably. But you know, we're only this age once, and these are life experiences that, who knows? Maybe we won't even be allowed to travel in 5 years. Maybe we won't have any airline pilots that actually know how to fly a plane, or maybe none of them work anymore because Boeing and all these other companies are such degenerate fiat companies that don't make quality products anymore. Who knows? And so yeah, it is a constant battle, but to your point, having it to be there to spend when you need it, when you want it, is the ultimate goal, and that's how we advise our our customers as well. And I liked your point about um, all these different products that make your job easier. I don't think we could have existed as a company like 3 years ago. We rely so much on our partner network for a lot of the stuff. We just kind of guide people through the process. But now the fact that there are all these other products out there, um, that make it like this. I mean, I can tell you for a fact we have a customer who reached out to us and was like, I don't want to hold any keys. I don't care how you do it, how you figure it out. I'm not holding a key. And so it's like, okay, understood. Let's work with you there. He's like, I had a cold wallet before and I'm never holding a key again and blah, blah, blah. So, okay. So, we are talking to him about a multi institution setup where it's like, okay, you're not holding a key, but institutions are, and now you can have the peace of mind knowing you need three institutions basically to rug you instead of one. Whereas, a few years ago, I think the only solution for this guy would have been like, you just have to kind of leave it on an exchange and hope you don't get rugged. And like, I'm not sure I would feel comfortable recommending that. I mean, I guess if the guy was basically just like, I don't really care, I wouldn't have another solution for him like this that I actually felt good about. And so being able to have have those options out there, man, makes my life a lot easier, and I sleep better at night.
100%, 100%. I do, want to double click into that, a little bit because I think like the real value of like your financial plan in this instance is to make data driven, decisions, and life changes, circumstances change, people change, goals change. That's all, fine and dandy. It's just that's we were talking about earlier. It's like, well, what's the value of professional services within Bitcoin? It's to help you identify, work through those things as different scenarios are like presented to you, but we do all the work, the proof of work, as I call it. I have like a proof of work section in my financial plans, my calculations and the actual cash flows, and how we derive to these different forecasting metrics is it's very important, and it's like you really get like the confidence to assess opportunities better as they come your way, because we're in a position where we've done the work and we can make an informed decision like moving forward. And so I take a lot of pride in that. We've got great reviews from our clients, which I'm very proud of, to help them do just that. And so yeah, I think Bitcoiners can maybe kind of do a little disservice sometimes just putting the blinders on, and it's just not really practically how life works.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, absolutely, everyone should self custody. There is no second best when it comes to that. I mean, that is first and foremost self custody. That is the real value in the network. That is the real value proposition of Bitcoin, is that anyone can verify the coins themselves every 10 minutes. And um, but unfortunately, you're just going to have some people who flat out refuse to do that. And so it's like, okay, do you just walk away from them? Do you just tell them, have fun staying poor? Or do you just, you know, try to come up with a solution, try to work through things and be a problem solver for them? And I love the fact that we have these multi-institution custody in those cases. However, I think multi-institution custody, shared custody, should be last resorts for people who just flat out don't want to do it, and or others who understand the trade-offs and have decided to make those themselves. So, anyways, we don't need to belabor this point.
Well, so
Okay,
sorry to interrupt. So I do want to
yeah,
belabor it a little bit, and that's why it's like
all right, belabor.
I I really like this idea we've come up with. Surface area. So you kind of think of it as like a three-dimensional graph, and it's like we try to compress it as much as we can to reduce our risk surface area, but that doesn't mean like our risk surface area ever disappears. And so identifying the trade-offs, understanding the trade-offs ahead of time before you decide on a custody solution, um, helps us make not only informed decisions, but we game plan through some of the potential pitfalls, understanding you can never remove every single pitfall. I think just in custody in general too, something I want to circle us back to like the Bitcoinization of finance thesis, and then we can move along. Where it's like I think you just did a good job really emphasizing the point is like a Bitcoin is very anti-fragile itself, and a Bitcoinized financial system, you know, um, how it differs from our current financial system is that we're actually decentralizing custody, which makes it, the system itself, much more resilient as opposed to now. Even stock, it seems so like commonplace nowadays. It's like there's so many layers of like custody to that, and who actually owns it. Like you log into your Charles Schwab account and you have like the appearance of owning a share of Apple, but it's like far from the case. And I think this is even worse in gold, just how centralized the custody of assets has become. And I think we're going to be in a much better place where custody itself is decentralized. I just get very optimistic thinking about that future.
Even the people in the industry don't understand where the custody ultimately lies. You have dealer brokers, you have float. I mean, it is so convoluted and so confusing that like if you try to unwind one of these things and like deliver an actual stock share, I mean, it would take like weeks to figure out, where the custody actually lies.
Right,
But
right.
it's insane to me. Those are some of the things that I consider myself pretty educated when it comes to finance and money and the banking system and stock markets. The chain of custody as it relates to trades and investments is just like my eyes glaze over. I'm just like, who is where, and they're taking this, and but they're in charge of the flow, but then we have the market maker, and it's just like, oh my god, there's just so many layers of lunacy. It's crazy. Um, but anyways, okay, so I said we get to this at the beginning, but in terms of or in line with rather the concept of what you're talking about, financial services for professionals, getting people into Bitcoin the right way, stressing self custody, financial planning. We have a conference coming up as I mentioned that I will be speaking at, that Wyatt will be at. Wyatt, are you speaking as well?
And yeah,
Okay, wonderful. So that's October 16th to October 18th, and it's at the Space in Denver, which is going to be my first time out there. I'm super excited. I hear nothing but amazing things about it. Going to go out there with my family, spend my dad's about an hour outside of Denver, go spend some time with him and my wife and my kid out there, and just really, really looking forward to it. But why don't you talk about the conference itself, what we can expect, and the focus of it? I mean, as far as I'm aware, this is kind of the first Bitcoin for financial services professionals that I'm aware of, and what this is going to be about, what people can expect to get out of it, and what to if you're thinking about, this space or whatever, getting more involved, meeting people, who would this be a good for them to attend?
absolutely, man. Yeah, I am so unbelievably excited about this. My colleague Jordan Guest approached me about this idea a couple of months ago, and I can't say yes fast enough. So you allow me to zoom out a little bit here. So the space itself is an amazing organization. I help start the space. I'm on the leadership team of the space, and we're a community run and operated, grassroots, Bitcoin Citadel. If you're not familiar with that concept, you can kind of think of it as like social club meets co-working meets event space meets like trade organization, and uh, it's very cool. I tell people all the time, it's probably the coolest project I'll work on in my career. And community building itself is very hard. It's very intensive. You have to actually make investment into people and getting to know folks, and it's one of the most rewarding things you can do. Don't get me wrong. And I've gained so much from the broader Bitcoin community, let alone our hyper local Bitcoin community. And um, it's really fantastic. It's a beautiful building, and in the nature of a true community and community space, it's like members chip in where they fit in. One of my I think the coolest examples, we actually have a version of the Art of Freedom gallery that was on display at the Bitcoin conference, up in our building, and those pieces are for sale on Scarce City, and that was just somebody raising their hand. It was like, wouldn't it be dope if the space was a Bitcoin art gallery? And everybody's like, yeah, it would be. It would be, and so it's just awesome seeing people come together and make things happen. And unfortunately, I think this idea of community is really, especially the younger generations, is really kind of lost. It's almost kind of like a lost art. And so I think it's just something really special that we've been able to catalyze that and make it happen, specifically within the Bitcoin space. And I'm a big fan of Balaji Srinivasan and, his, network state, theory and ideology. And, it's like we've planted our orange flag. He has this one podcast episode, it's like, well, how do you fix San Francisco? And he's like, you just take it back block by block, And so, I think we're kind of doing our little version of that by just getting folks that are morally and ethically aligned to work together, and that's something really special. I would encourage everybody to seek out or try to build themselves. But in that vein, while I consider myself a child of the internet, I think internet has done tremendous good. Bitcoin obviously internet native protocol. There's nothing better than getting together in real life. And I've learned more about Bitcoin just talking to people and asking questions, face to face over, dinner or beer or whatever. And that's something you can't, replace, nor do I think we should try to replace as humans. I think, it's extremely, important to our social code and social fabric to just interacting with each other and bouncing ideas and disagreeing and having debates. And there's obviously not a better topic to do it around than Bitcoin. And so my specific role at the space is heading up my marketing and business development efforts. And so what we're really trying to do is just talk to a lot of Bitcoin companies in my role there, and Bitcoin conference is kind of in a league of its own, right? The 30 or 40,000 people in Vegas this year, which is awesome. We got to meet in person for the first time, which was amazing, and
We did. Yeah.
that was great. It's like actually getting to connect in person. It's like I said earlier, you can't replicate that, and so understanding we're not in a position to pull off a 40,000 person event. You're just talking to these companies, and it's like almost kind of like the middle tier conferences that seem to be on the no shade at them, but chopping block. It's like if you're going to get sponsored dollars, like there's a lot of Bitcoin events. It's like how do you balance like getting enough people, a lot of competition. Sponsors obviously want a return on investment, for what they're putting forward for those events. And so what we're trying to do at the space is focus on like these summit type events. So it's like our building maxes out at 150 people. We're going to pack it, but it's hyper focused on like one specific topic, right? And it's like hence the birth of the Bitcoin Financial Services Summit. And we've done one other summit. My dear friend Tyler Stevens hosted the Heap Hunt Summit, and that was like a smashing success. And people liked it because it wasn't kind of like this overload of just like a mass amount of people. And it's like mining stage over here, open source stage over there. It's like, it's almost like you're drinking from the firehouse. And so what we're trying to do with these summits is, like I said, hyper specific on one particular topic. And what we're doing, specifically here is getting, folks from the greater realm of, financial services to come and talk about how Bitcoin integrates into them and like the growing subsector of Bitcoin financial, services. And so we're going to have, folks like yourself, which we're honored to have you. Thank you for coming. Talking about,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I paid my dues in the TradFi world, so yeah.
That's right. No, and that's very important because there are great lessons to take from that, and we've shown have a negative view on those types of experiences. So we're going to be talking about, treasury management. We're going to be, we got a great lineup of CPAs talking about, um, you know, accepting Bitcoin, the tax ramification of Bitcoin. We have asset managers. We have, lenders. We have, folks like myself in the RIA and financial planning world. We got estate planning attorneys. We have venture capitalists. And so really just bringing in the swath of financial services folks, I think is going to make us much stronger as an industry. I'm super excited about that. I think, Jordan and I were talking about the numbers. I think 80% or so of our speakers are founders or executives at their respective companies. So, these are people that bring, a lot of signal. They're in the trenches building every day. And while that may seem like a fairly broad swath, like we were talking about earlier, it's like I'm a huge fan of the folks over at Build Asset Management. They have a private credit fund, and so ultimately they raise dollars from investors. They buy Bitcoin collateralized loans, and they pass that interest to their investors. So it's dollars in, dollars out. But in my advising business, I may have a client that has a need for fixed income, and so if I need to satisfy that need, what are my options? Like a T-bill that is literally getting rotting away. The melting,
Destroyed.
yeah,
Yeah.
the melting ice cube. You're getting paid back with
Yeah.
printing money, so you don't actually get anywhere. Or a fixed income product where the underlying collateral is Bitcoin. It's like, well, if they qualify, you have to be a credit investor, yada yada. But if they qualify, it's like obviously like that's a route like I'm gonna suggest. And so having venture capitalists, having those asset managers, having the estate planning attorneys, having the CPAs, like I need to tap into like all of these different networks to be able to give the best possible service to my clients. And I love being a member of the Bitcoin Financial Advisors Network. We have quarterly kind of like brain trust calls where we can bounce ideas off each other. It's like, what are you seeing in the industry? We kind of go through case studies, and so just being able to learn from my peers that are seeing a lot of the same things I am, and bounce ideas off each other, especially in person. I think there's really no replicating that. And it's something I'm very focused on or concerned about. Like I mentioned, that this kind of falls within like the ethos of Bitcoin is pretty conservative guy, small market or small government, like principles. And so it's not lost on me that if my peers don't hold, each other to a high standard, we are going to make ourselves a target for government overreach and regulation. And so, what I'm really excited about of bringing all these types of folks, together is that we can hold ourselves to a high standard. And if we just agree to do business with each other the right way, and we don't do business with the FTXs of the world, the Celsiuses of the world, because they don't do business within the ethos of Bitcoin, we're just going to like end up self-regulating ourselves, which is a much better, dynamic to build companies in, to work in, to be a participant in, as opposed to what we were talking about earlier. It's like, some sort of central planner, coming down and breathing down our neck and not actually understanding, the asset class or the industry, in general. And so I really think it's like the convergence of, all these things that's going to make this event, very special.
And I couldn't agree with you more on the community and policing ourselves. I actually talked about this a little bit. I was on a panel in Prague, and what we were talking about earlier with the churches and the lockdowns and stuff. A big part of the reason the government was able to get rid of that was because there was no unifying force. Everyone felt like they were out on an island. There was no community, and ironically one of the first communities, which really forced me down the rabbit hole to push back against the overreach, was the Bitcoin community, and they were having events. They got in person, and it was like, hey, we're all together. It's a lot easier to stand up to pressure and to tyranny when you have a group of people. So beyond even just the we're going to police ourselves and make sure we do things the right way in this community, we're also forming uh, we're also forming a bond and forming like a backbone to push back. I mean, when the I forget if it was the EPA or some other alphabet soup agency put out those regulations against the mining industry, like when
Like send me
Joe
your
Biden was in
your
office.
longitude and
Yeah,
latitude.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And like there was a mass, like 70 companies got together and they were like, no, we're pushing back. And I mean, that had a huge impact on getting that reversed and um, building these communities, building a strong structure and good bones, I like to say, to be able to push back against a lot of the potential legal overreach and governmental overreach that's inevitably going to come into this industry, starting to have these communities, these groups of people to be able to stand up to that and say no. I mean, the the amount of companies that stood up and said no to COVID, I think you could count on one hand. Big companies, I'm talking about. Um, that actually stood up and said no and were a voice for the public. I mean, everyone just fell in line. And, probably because they were being told by their HR departments and their legal teams. And it's like, no, you needed a network of CEOs, of C suite folks, of executives, of owners to get together and being like, we're all just not going to go along with this. And you deal with this government because we're not playing ball. And that's what we need. And I apologize. This is totally an aside from what we were talking about, but I do think it's an important part of the community building within Bitcoin, going to these small events, building, you go to these giant events and you make some connections and you're around great people for sure, but you don't develop this sort of intimate bond that you do at these smaller events where you really get to know people and you're spending multiple days with them focused on one subject. And I'll be honest, at the Bitcoin event, there's 150 people I want to talk to and socialize with. And it's like these events, it's like, there's 5 or 6 people and we're developing strong, lasting relationships. And, that's sort of an ancillary benefit that also doesn't really get talked about at these kind of smaller, focused events where you really just bring super high pointed signal on one topic.
You're 100% right. And something I think Bitcoiners and specifically people building businesses in the Bitcoin industry like need to understand it's like this whole idea of like self regulation isn't like a new concept. Industries have done this in the past. This is like the way I prefer to operate, and I think it's very peer to peer. Within like the nature of Bitcoin, it's like do you like trust doing business with your neighbors, kind of like the root kind of thought here. It's just Bitcoiners and people building the Bitcoin industry are you have a unique ability to do this because it is a nascent, young, growing industry. So I think the more work we do on this front to get ahead of the curve, the better off we'll be. Um, and you did mention I obviously love hanging out with Bitcoiners, and I don't think there's anything more infectious than getting a bunch of Bitcoiners in the room. Just like the energy is palpable, and it's like you want to be part of those crowds. And Jordan and I have been like very intentional with how we're structuring the event. We have a lot of built-in networking time. I think there's going to be awesome group of folks there. So we want to give people the opportunity to chat and mingle and get to know each other. We're doing some cool stuff like a golf tournament. On Friday night we're doing a group dinner and a bourbon and wine tasting. We have 2 hour breakfasts in the morning. We have hour and a half lunches. So it's like really just kind of giving people the space and opportunity to like not only listen to the talks, but actually do business and get to know each other. It's like I think that just makes like a good event.
Absolutely. Any event with a bourbon tasting is a good event in my book. So, um, awesome. So yeah, that's going to be on October 16th through the 18th. Like I said, both Wyatt and myself will be there. You can sign up with the promo code Sovereign, spelled the way it is on my shirt, SOVREIGN, for a 10% discount. Wyatt, sorry if you have a discount code, and I'm poaching yours here.
No, no,
Yeah.
that's the one I would use if I were you, club. And those
Right.
tickets can be purchased at Denver.space.
Denver.space. Awesome. Well, Wyatt, I am really looking forward to coming out there. I got this trip circled on the calendar. It's also like the perfect time of year to come out and visit Denver. In like middle of October, heart of fall, just the best weather out there. I'm sure I'm going to regret saying this. It'll probably be terrible now, but anyways, it's a great time, and like Wyatt said, there's a golf outing, there's some other events to have some fun and enjoy the actual area, as opposed to some of these conferences you just go and you're just indoors in some conference center all day and you don't really get to experience the surrounding area and that sort of thing. So this would be a cool way to both experience the surrounding area, be out in nature, and one of the most beautiful parts of the country, and talk about a very specific subject for that is near and dear to all of our hearts, which is planning for our future, securing our wealth, and taking care of our families and ourselves. So, Wyatt, if people want to reach out to you personally or your company, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of agree more, Brandon. I'm super appreciate the opportunity to come on your chat. It's been awesome. Um, you can find me on X at Wyatt O'Rourke underscore. If you're interested in a free consultation, you can find our work at Basilic.io. And if you're interested in some of my personal writings, you can find those at WyattO'Rourke.com.
Awesome. Well, Wyatt, really appreciate your time. Like you said, we met in Vegas and we definitely got cut off way too soon. I know you only had like a half hour to chat, and it was definitely way too short. So I'm glad we got to extend the conversation here, and we'll extend it even further when we see each other in October. So great talking, great catching up. As always, I'm Plebe Anon on Noster, and you can check out the Sovereign, SOVREIGN X account. We're on LinkedIn. We're also on Noster as well. So come find us on any of those platforms that you may use. And reach out if you're interested in talking with us or think you might have a business that might want some onboarding, or you want to talk to us about your business using Bitcoin. We love talking to people in the Bitcoin space that are running their own businesses using Bitcoin. That's what gets us excited. That's why we wake up every day, is to have that number multiply year after year. So thanks so much, Wyatt, and we'll talk to you next time.